Thank you very much. No pressure. I would like to very much thank the conference organizers for having me. I mean that in all sincerity. I also realize that they must truly love and believe me because they put me between lunch and your escape. So I must keep you awake. And then it was even better. They put me on the agenda with a fabulous award-winning author, actor, and a jet pilot. So, no competition there. And it's one thing to come at the end of the conference, right? Particularly after you've had a really lovely, all upbeat and happy conversation about the work of the task force and the future of libraries. And so normally, I get invited at the beginning to charge people up, and now my job, I guess, is to send you on your way. So I will send you fleeing quickly. But as I'm doing this, one of the things you have to realize is that when you're at the end, you get to sit and listen to other people present. And that's great because now I get to claim all of their good ideas as mine. Twist what they said to my evil means. But it also comes at the price that, after every presentation, you're like, well, there goes that slide, and there goes that slide. And pretty much at the end, I'm left with nothing to say. But, they did great. Congratulations. Have a good day. But I was struck particularly in just the previous conversation on the task force about how far we've come. I don't know how long you've been in the business. I remember when I was young in the business and these weren't as gray. But I've been going to library conferences of all sorts for about 20 years. Some of you, that might seem a long time. Some of you are sitting there going, a babe in the arms, whatever it is. But I want to see if I can set you back 20 years. Well, I want to see if I can set this organization back 20 years. Set your mind back 20 years. So let's see, 1996. You go to a conference, a library conference like this with directors. What would the conversation have been? My guess is it probably wouldn't have been about networks, and it probably wouldn't have been about it wouldn't have been about living knowledge networks. It would have been around networks, but it would always have been resource sharing networks, or how we can get our MARC records in order so that we can distribute them via floppy disk as fast as we can. Because even in 1996, there were still some of us using floppy disks, right? And you would have these conversations about what our staff needed, and reference services and technical services, and how do we handle the load of acquisitions, and can we look at collective buying decisions. And it was very much about the business of running a collection, the business of a building, the business of talking amongst ourselves. Right? Think about what we've just talked about over the past 2 years, and these are just in the public sessions, right? We talked about living knowledge networks, which was about networking people, not just stuff. And what's amazing is when I saw the raised hand, and it was, are you going to make sure that there are some people from the country and not just urban centers? And why I find that interesting is that 20 years ago, that would have been, well, make sure academic libraries are well represented, or, oh no, we have special collections here. We would have been talking about how our collections collide. Right? Here we're talking about we have different points of view. Our communities are different. We as people have different agendas. How do we put them together? And so now when we talk about library networks, we talk about people. And that's a pretty dramatic change. We talked, when we were talking about Bromley by Bow, they talked about Bob's Park. The idea that we would build these campuses and that we would build them based on community knowledge, not on what's officially stamped elsewhere. I know it sounds like a little itty-bitty thing, the idea that we used not the official name, but the name that our community used, and based it around an individual, and that sort of brought a human face to these things. That's a remarkable change from worrying about collection density and how we can work with archives, and what are we doing in terms of returns and deliveries. We talked about workeries. Right? We talked about the idea of bringing people in to start businesses, bringing entrepreneurs in, taking low-utilized space, which, by the way, as a personal opinion, please never use the phrase low-utilized space again, because it's just begging for people to come in and say, well, all right? Right? But good news, the person who came in had all good intentions, right? So David did some amazing stuff. And what I loved about that story was that you could tell the kinds of conversation. David, are you here still? Oh, good. That we can talk. I get last word. You could tell the kind of conversations he had because he kept emphasizing over and over again how the librarians didn't have to do anything, how it wasn't going to be a burden on them. Right? And I went up to him and I said, so is there any value to having librarians around the workery? He said, oh yeah, but I don't tell him that, right? But he talked about the idea that when they fixed up the joint, they had the entrepreneurs sitting right next to the librarians and the library staff so that they were getting sort of modeling and new services going. Amazing stuff. We talked about fighter jets and leadership. Yay. I mean, maybe Britain's very different, but we often do not bring people in from the Air Force to talk about how we communicate and we collaborate. My new job, by the way, is I'm starting in July 1st. I'm going to be at the University of South Carolina. I'm going to be the director of their School of Library and Information Science, and I'm thinking I'm going to implement a military-style academic library. Director on deck? All right. We talked about fun palaces. Good Lord, people, do you know what the counselors must think if they looked at the agenda and go, you talked about fun palaces? Could you perhaps tell me what that's about, right? This idea that we talked about a dance club when they were talking about our foundations, right? The slide they put up, we just sort of slid by it, but it was really turning our libraries into raves. It's like we do circulation, we do reference, and we do ecstasy. But So first of all, what I want to do is I want to take a deep breath and take a moment to realize that while it may not have happened overnight, we have lived through and represent a seismic shift in the profession. We have moved from the idea of a library as place and collection and thing to library as place and experience and service. And it didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen easily. My guess is that among the audience today are people who bear the scars of making those changes and people who bear resentment for those changes. But it is a change. I came from the days when I would be invited so I could talk about qualified Dublin core fields and how we could do metadata, right? This is what our conversations were about, and now we're talking about fun palaces. But I also want, in this sort of self-congratulatory moment, to think for a second about what our communities, who may not have used us in 20 years, must suddenly think when they show up in these spaces. Right? We love to tell the stories of how these communities are being unleashed and the expertise is going crazy and the idea of all these new opportunities and new services, but we know very well and very intimately and often in long protracted conversation that sometimes when these communities see this, they go, that's a library? And it's often not, that's a library. No, it's, that's a library? Right? We deal with this idea that while we have made a significant shift, and while we have miles to go, and while there are serious issues around funding, while there are serious issues about workforce, and there are serious issues about training, we have not necessarily brought our communities along with us in that transition. And so what I have found in the United States, and by the way, I'm from the United States, and I will only be arrogant enough to speak for my country. The second half of this presentation will be completely Trump jokes, so just hold on. Yes, we are as terrified as you are. From the U.S. experience, from working with libraries on a regular basis and working in libraries in other countries and coming and visiting, what becomes very obvious is that sometimes, while the old myth is that we have librarians who are sort of, buttoned down and won't move and won't change and et cetera, that in fact much of the barriers to innovation are our communities ourselves. Right? So I want to be very clear, I love communities. I'm a big community person, but they can be a pain in the ass. Right? And so we have to talk about how do we communicate the possibilities? And we also have to realize that when we have discussions about what is it that is truly ambitious about this plan, what is the vision for 5 and 10 years, as we begin to talk about those things, it's really easy to get excited about these things. But it can be much harder to say why these things exist in a library or together. And oftentimes, we get so wrapped up in trying and do things that sometimes we lose a little bit of our rudder to say, this is why we're doing it. I have had really, so the US system I know is very different in how we support public libraries. We tend to have boards, which I believe you folks would talk about as sort of independence. I mean, so it's not quite council, but there are municipal libraries that work directly with mayors and such. And what I find is really well-meaning, supportive board members, politicians, community members who simply cannot connect the dots. I love this idea. I've loved libraries, but why is this a library, and why is this better than what I used to think a library was? And so what I would like to spend a little bit of time with you before you rush off is to talk about this, to talk about the power of a narrative, to talk about how we can communicate this out. And I want to use the US as an example, but then I want to spend some time talking about the elements of this narrative because they have meaning. And particularly I want to talk about our use of words. I want to talk about what happens when we use certain terms and phrases, and do we realize that those have implications, and are we comfortable with what they are? And finally, I want to spend a little bit of time at the end talking about librarianship and what holds these things together at a very deep intellectual and philosophical level that is just as important as getting people's attention. So I will begin with the narrative with my perceived picture of the state of UK libraries upon getting on the plane on Tuesday. I'm seeing if we have any sci-fi fans who've seen 28 Days Later, right? This zombie apocalypse. If you follow the Twitter feed, if you see what's going on across the pond, I was amazed that you all still had a job. I was amazed that there was a library left open, much less a library that was doing well. Right? As I talked to people here today, I got a lot of, yes, there are hard times, absolutely. But there are good things too. Why don't we ever hear about the good things? Why doesn't people pick up the good things? What I want to talk about is, to me, this is very much the power of a narrative. This is a narrative that is being driven. And what I'm realizing is not necessarily by the people in this room that are not happy with this narrative, or don't see it as a constructive narrative, or may, but there are narratives going on for different reasons. And what I want to talk about is how we can control it and how we can look at it and what the attributes are. And so I'm going to begin with a narrative that was made very obvious to me by a Swedish reporter who was here yesterday talking with me, and he talked about, how is it more or less working in libraries in the United States when the police are killing all the black people? This is Ferguson, Missouri. So Ferguson, Missouri, for those of you who don't know, it's in what we call the heartland. It's called the Midwest. Some people call it the flyover country, right? St. Louis is in the middle of the country. And what happened was a white cop killed a black teenager. Not only did he shoot the black teenager who was unarmed, he left the body bleeding for hours on the street before anyone took care of it. Now, this alone is a horrible, horrible thing. But what's more horrible is that it demonstrated that in this primarily African-American population that lived in Ferguson, Missouri, all but one of the officers was white. And that non-white officers, I believe, was American Samoan. That what happened was it revealed a massive set of tension. And so what happened is Ferguson exploded. Ferguson exploded because this was the straw that broke the camel's back. This was the time that brought out protests, initially peaceful protests. But anger boiled over, and those peaceful protesters, as they had to retreat to their houses, as the angry took over and looting occurred. And what happened is that the mayor and then the governor of the state called out the National Guard. They called out a militarized police force. I want to be very clear that if you look at this picture right here, these are police in military camouflage fatigues. Now, I don't know what it's like everywhere in England, but understand that this was not making them unobtrusive and you couldn't see them in Ferguson. I mean, they'd have to be sort of dressed as a pizza delivery guy or working at Walmart to blend in. They had body armor. They had mine-resistant vehicles that they rolled out. And the mayor and the governor put a curfew on the city, and they closed the schools. Now, you may say they closed the schools. What's the big deal? In the United States, we have certain populations that when they're below a certain economy, when they're in poverty, they receive food aid for children. They get food. That food is delivered in the schools. So what happened was, in the midst of this upheaval, in the midst of tear gas and rubber bullets, in the midst of looting, families were locked into their homes, worried that something was going to happen, and the children weren't going to school. They were up all night with their fathers, as one radio reporter had, holding a bat just in case trouble came a-knocking, and they were hungry. And this became news all over the United States. This was the nightly news. These were the images being presented of attack dogs. And I'll tell you, it's a narrative that unfortunately we're familiar with, white versus black, cops versus looters. And then something very interesting happened. In the middle of this, a librarian who'd been on the job for, I believe, about a week, maybe a month, put out a little itty-bitty sign. I know you can't read it and you're really close, but I just wanted to, it's an itty-bitty sign outside of the library that says, "Stay strong, Ferguson, we are family." Now, what happened was Scott Bonner, who did this, decided that he was going to open the library. Now, you got to put yourself in this position, right? The city's in upheaval, the news is going crazy, the governor is out, the National Guard is there, they've closed the schools. Do you imagine if the librarian called the mayor and said, "I'm thinking maybe not today," that the mayor would have gone, "No, library must open." But they opened. They chose to open. And not only did they choose to open, what they did, what Scott did and what his staff did, and what librarians did down the street at the St. Louis County Public Library System, is they invited the teachers from the closed schools to come in and teach their school in the library. And students came then and had some place to be and continue their education. And while they were there, they fed them. And then they got museum folks who were volunteering to come and present the science of, I love that, by the way, the science of whatever it is. And they had magicians volunteering their time, and they did programs and did all of this thing. But what was amazing in doing this is that they changed the narrative. By doing this and having the newspapers start to pick this up and have the news start picking this up and telling a different story, suddenly, instead of Ferguson becoming out there and over there and not us, no, never, we're a family. I have kids. I'm worried about them going to school. I'm worried about these things. And so suddenly, a story went from, "Oh, that's horrible over there," to, "That's my backyard." Syracuse, New York is not, by the way, it's 4.5, 5-hour drive from New York City. It has a population of roughly 300,000 if you add like friends and neighbors and invite them over for the day. It's not huge. But it has what they call micro-segregation, that is street by street racial divides. It has the highest per capita poverty rate in the country. Is my backyard. And I looked at this and I saw this and I said, that could be Syracuse. And people looked at it and they said, that could be Los Angeles, that could be Des Moines, that could be, as we'll talk about in a moment, Baltimore. And it changed the narrative. And what came out, instead of, "Oh, that's too bad for them, oh, it's black and white," it came out as, here is a community struggling and a library that was part of the solution. That's the kind of power that narratives can have. We understand as librarians intuitively the power of the story. Story hours, the power of literature, the power of telling a story, making a narrative that people can grasp. And here was a circumstance, which, by the way, was not planned. It's not like Scott woke up in the morning and said, "I'm going to change the national narrative." Right? He did what was instinctive. He served. He was out there. He was a part of it. And by doing that, by doing his job, by living his values and his ethics of librarianship, he changed that narrative. And he wasn't alone. He had a great staff. There were other librarians who were part of it. So I want to talk to you now about narratives around libraries and some of the things that we found in the States. This is a set of narratives that Jamie LaRue, who's now in charge of sort of the Intellectual Freedom Foundation for the American Library Association, he was the former director of the Douglas County Public Library. Here are the narratives that he thinks make a lot of sense. He says, we're here for you when times are tough. And he, this is not just a matter of the real tough stuff, right? There's the Ferguson sign. This is what happened in Baltimore County when a police force threw a handcuffed man in the back of a van, didn't secure him, and snapped his neck on the way to jail, causing the largest peaceful civil protest in the history of the country. But anger boiled over, and riots occurred, and in one of the most economically depressed areas, people went building to building and ripped down a mall, shopping areas, convenience stores. And into this, there was a branch of the Enoch Pratt Public Library, and Melanie Townsend Diggs, who was the branch manager, called up her director, Carla Hayden, who you may know is the current nominee for the Library of Congress, said, I'm going to open tomorrow. And Carla said, and I'm going to be there. And they did. Because it turns out that when these people had torn down all of these things, they tore down all the public facilities. They tore down all the shopping. There was no transportation to get out. They had now families who not only needed to use a bathroom, they needed diapers for their babies and baby food. They needed now legal assistance. They needed access to insurance. They needed a community to come help them. And Melanie opened the door. The picture on the extreme, you can't see it, but that's the result of a hurricane. We get those on a regular basis. And this one went to New York City, and it wiped out a fair amount of the beach communities along New Jersey and a good part of New York City. And libraries opened. Libraries opened because librarians came in and opened branches when even their own homes had been destroyed. And did they do it because people desperately needed reading material at that point? No. They could use it. They could use the distraction, but they needed power to charge their cell phones because quite literally that was the only way they could tell their relatives they were still alive. We are here when you need us. We are here when times are tough. We are here when employment goes down and you need help applying for a job. We are here when you need to know what a resume is. We're here when, in the United States, if you apply to be a janitor, many large corporations make you apply online to do that. Not because, by the way, the janitor service in any way requires any technology experience. And not only do they make you apply online, they time how fast it is when you click and use it as part of their hiring determinations. And what do librarians do? I have some great librarians. They call up these companies and go, do you realize? And they scold them over the phone. Librarians should learn to scold. We should be much better at that. Right? We should replace shh with you mother. Just. We're here for times are tough. This is it. Whether it's economy, and I know we're suffering as well. But communities remember that. They remember it so that when they do better, their community should do better, and they support things to get better. We think ahead. It's wonderful that you have a lovely ebook. It's too bad that it was bought through Borders, right? It's a lovely book on a device that no longer exists. Oh, maybe we should archive these things past tomorrow. Oh, you would like to know what the decision was in 1962? It turns out someone cared enough to keep that. We provide this and we think ahead in terms of these things. We are co-creators. We are places where you don't simply come to consume and read and be blissfully unaware. This is a place where you come to create and perform and develop businesses, music, yourself, your view, your possibilities. We are places of co-creation. We make things better. This was a study done by the University of Toronto and their Prosperity Institute on the value returned to the citizens of Toronto, Canada, by the Toronto Public Library, where they found little things like, it turns out that $5.63. Now, just because David started the theme, I will now attempt some accents. $5.63 of economic impact for every dollar spent. For every dollar that you put into this, every tax dollar that you pay us, we return to you $5.63. And this wasn't a magical number. This wasn't they did real work. And they built a model that other people could take and begin to evaluate it. Now, I am very clear, as we've had these conversations this week, that the value that provided by libraries isn't simply monetary. I get that. But at the same time, we do provide monetary support. We do provide positions, we can make things better economically, we can make things better culturally, we can make things better educationally, we can make things better in health. We've seen examples of that just in the past 2 days. You guys are making things better. Let's tell that story. We build communities. We build communities. Communities are based through conversations, or bringing them together. What we see in city after city and country after country, in San Giorgio Public Library in Pistoia, Italy, outside of Florence. You should take a field trip. They have a new public library. It is brilliant. It is beautiful. And it is quite literally the new public square. In this old city, this old town, they had been doing development, and they turned development, and they'd sort of gotten rid of literally the piazza. The new piazza was the library. And what was amazing is that's not just a matter of saying it was a place and it was coffee and that's delightful. They invited what they call allies in. In weekends, they would offer 50 programs. They had a staff of 14. 50 programs. They would have psychologists, they would have metal workers, they would have bakers, they would have authors, they would have people doing film, and they would come in and they were teaching the community how this worked and and they were sharing. And very much aligned with the idea of a fun palace. Right? We build community. We're here because we have identity. In the United States, and this may be a solely United States problem, what is truly belongs and represents the entirety of a community is disappearing. It is not the police station. People don't go hang out in the police station for fun. People don't go hang out in town hall because that's where politics occurs. Right? And I'm sure you don't have this problem, but it turns out in the United States, we have a little political ideology issue where politicians don't talk to each other anymore. That's not where you go for consensus anymore. So where do they go? The schools, that's for young kids. They go to the library, regardless of age, regardless of class, they go to the library. Libraries build community. What is the story of your community? Here I am. I'm from the States. I'm an ignorant American, as most of us are. And I'm going to go visit your town, your service area, your shire, your city, what have you. Can I go to your library and get a sense of what that community is? Can I go to your library and understand what is the culture, the cuisine, the music, the performance, the outstanding issues, the discussions, the hot spots? Can I understand the nature and the story of your community? We see in the cultural heritage area the rise of city museums. I love city museums. Liverpool has an amazing city museum. That's where I sort of first discovered them. And the museum is not for people like me, it's for the people of the city to come and understand their own history and culture and heritage. Do you provide that narrative? What is the story that your community wants to tell, and are you an active part of it? We talked here about really specific ways of doing it, aligning outputs and making sure that outcomes are aligned between council. That's a great way of saying it, but think of it this way. Does your town, city, service area have a story? What is it? Can I discover it? And are you a part of it? What's the narrative that comes out of it? This is an up-and-coming city. This is a quiet city. This is a literate city. This is an exciting city. What's the narrative, and are you part of it? You can trust us. That's an amazing thing, right? When you look at the brand of library and librarianship around the world, we beat Google and we beat Apple in trusted brand. People love us. Even if they think we're useless and obsolete, they always start with an, oh. I mean, Stella's point about just throw the science of in front of anything, you can just throw the in a public library at the end of anything and it does the same effect. It's like, reading in the public library. Oh. Service dogs in a public library. Oh. Butchery and axe murder in a public, oh. I mean, we're all tired of it, What do? I'm a librarian. Oh, I always wanted to be a librarian. Read all day. What were we replacing shush with again? Anyway, all right. My line that is a purely American line and will make absolutely no sense in Britain is that to become a librarian because you love books is like becoming a policeman because you love guns. You hopefully aren't going to use them that much. But anyway. And we will endure. We will endure. That's a message I heard here. Times are tough. Things are tough. We cannot, I love the phrase, we're out of animal to cut and pare down. We need a new animal, right? I hear it, and it's painful, but we will endure. Our communities need us. We've been through bad times before. We need your support. We need your resources, but we will endure. Because if we go to them and say, will we re-endure? You're right. That's not a message that people are going to pick up. Would you like us? Stop asking your community if they like you. Stop asking your community, how could the library be better? They don't care, and it's not their job. I don't mean, what you ask them is, what's your problem? No, not what's your problem. What's your challenge? What's your problem? What are you seeking to do? What are you learning today? Where are you going? And then, did you know we can be part of that? We can help you be part of it. That's a very different discussion than, here's a survey of your thoughts of the library. We need to do some of that, but that shouldn't be our main question for our community. Our community, it shouldn't be, by the way, what's your problem? I take that back. It should be, what are your dreams? What are your aspirations? What do you want to be? Where do you want to go? What do you want to try? Libraries are really great at the sort of remediation narrative. We're really great because we want to help people. We want to serve people. Let's be honest, we want to fix people. All right? We see people who can't read, and we want to fix them so they can read. We see people that don't have enough food. We want to fix them so they can be fat like me. Right? It's built into our DNA. We're genetically driven to serve. It's a nasty, horrible thing, but we're not going to get over it. But have you ever thought for a moment about the phrase, can I help you? Which we take as this lovely symbol of altruism, but may in fact be one of the most arrogant things that you can say to someone. How can I help you? Because clearly you can't help me. And clearly if you're here, you need help. What does that say about our facilities? But anyway, right? Instead, what if we said, where are you going? What are you doing? What's your passion? What do you want to dream about? Right? Then, how can I help you? At least they've started the conversation. How can I be a part of that? How can I make it happen? And we will endure. And there are some brilliant, I want to be clear, there are some brilliant marketing campaigns. I love this campaign. I really do. The Universal Offerings to me is a lovely, incredible, wonderful campaign. This is not now he's going to slam it. No, good. Right? I have to award Philip and Nick, I was telling him previously, there is a tonal change that I perceived over the past 5 years around libraries and information science, and it is a much more aggressive and I think much more positive narrative that goes out that says something like, poor libraries, has changed to, you need libraries. We do this, and we do this, and we do this, right? This chart, looking at Ned Potter's great usage, this is a change in narrative. This is good stuff. In the U.S., under Sari Feldman as our current ALA president, but it should be carried on, we have Libraries Transform, where we have posters that talk about because students can't afford scholarly journals on a ramen noodle budget. Takes a quick look at all right, anyway. Because punctuation without imagination makes a sentence, not a story. I don't know what it means, but I love it. Right? Because there are more than 14,400,000 search results for the 2016 presidential election, and most of them are no! Because more than a quarter of U.S. households don't have a computer with an internet connection. You guys are worried about having adequate Wi-Fi in yours? We're worried about, there is an island, digression. There is an island in Alaska, right? So if you've seen Alaska, it's probably on some travel show, and it's probably lovely with glaciers. But there are people that actually live there. Notice that didn't get recorded. And there are some folks who live off an island. And in this island off the coast, and this coast had an internet connection. It was a trunk line brought in from the mainland into the island. And the legislature of Alaska decided that, that's $30,000 a year that we really can't afford. We're going to cut it. The librarian picked up the phone, called their legislator, and said, have you ever heard of the phrase disenfranchisement? Now, you may have heard of that word, but that actually has a very specific constitutional meaning in the United States about taking away someone's right to vote. It's what you take to the Supreme Court on a regular basis. And so guess where the $30,000 got reapplied, right? We provide these kinds of things. And the focus here is on transformation. This isn't a transaction. You don't come in, get a book, go away. You don't come in, get an answer, go away. You come in and you build a relationship, you build a history, you build an agenda, you build aspirations, you build dreams. Now, I tried really hard to get that to be Librarians transform, but the American Library Association was not willing to go that far. We'll get them next time. And this has significantly, these kinds of efforts have significantly resulted in a change in perception among the public around libraries in the United States. And once again, the United States is a very different world in how they're governed and how they're managed. The concept of having a task force to come up with a countrywide vision of libraries is about as amenable to most people in the United States as a Trump presidency. So it happens by coercion. It happens through budgeting from the federal level. It happens a lot through conversation and discussion. It happens by getting people to adopt things. And what it's resulted in is a perception change. This is a recent article in the New York Times that talked about the public libraries are for snowshoes and ukuleles, which, you're sort of like, ugh. But when you go into it, it's all about libraries are changed. They're not just about going to check out books. They've transformed from quiet buildings with a loud room or two to loud buildings with a quiet room or two. And this is a good thing. What we see in this, what we see in our Washington papers, what we see in our big national papers is a realization that libraries are about communities and libraries are about learning. But it didn't happen automatically. In fact, I sort of have my brief timeline of how the media has looked at libraries since about the year 2000. So the year 2000 was characterized, if I looked at sort of what the press was writing about libraries, and some of you science fiction geeks might recognize the Twilight Zone episode that's over there. That was the last librarian who was declared obsolete and therefore was going to be blown up in his room. I'm sure it's on YouTube. It's worth it. But this was the first narrative. I cannot tell you the number of articles in journals and magazines, in the press, frankly, in the library literature that said, the internet's here, game over, we're done, right? This was, Google even was early at this point, but we're, back to the literature of digitization, the network, we don't need libraries anymore, they're obsolete, congratulations, we're done, move on. And I tell you, the worst part about it is that we would have conferences like this, and there was a good percentage of the librarians in that meeting that frankly went like this. Now, what happened is in about 2006, the reporters came back. Because I think they initially came back to declare victory upon our ashes as they danced. We're not all as bad as the British media. But anyway, the idea, and they found that libraries were still going strong, and in fact, they found more people in libraries than ever, and they looked at circulation statistics going up, and they looked at all this stuff, and they went, what the hell? And this is, again, the power of narrative, which is at the time when the reporters did this, the libraries weren't ready with a narrative. They weren't ready to explain why this was happening. And so the reporters looking around, I don't know if you have ever lost a great deal of weight. I have lost and gained a great deal of weight. And when you lose a lot of weight, you walk into a room in like this super proud thing because you're pretty sure that you now look like Pick Adonis here. Right? And people look at you and go, did you get your hair cut? So they looked around and what did they found? They found librarians with tattoos. I swear to God, there's a genre. Just spend time putting tattooed librarians into Google. This, believe it or not, it actually is a safe for work activity. You have to put tattooed librarians naughty if you want the good stuff. But, right? I mean, article after article. The Texas Library Association put out a calendar of tattooed Texas librarians. And the reporters were kind of like, well, it must be a fad. It's kind of like some reason all of New York City loved cupcakes, And so it must be tattooed librarians. So it's a new generation of tattooed librarians, and the hipsters are going. Not paying attention that, in fact, there were kids and there were retirees and there were whole families and the affluent, and all these were showing up. And then the library community got a better idea of what was happening and said, we need to put a narrative together. And that narrative is that libraries are about community. We build community, we're part of community. And that message is what's now going into the New York Times and into the Washington Post and into the Washington Journal, etc. We're starting to get the story out because we're starting to agree upon the story. and I'm going to jump ahead because I'm taking too much time because I'm having a good time, but a couple of things about this. First, a narrative is an active message. You have to go out and put it out. It's not bragging if it's true. You guys are doing amazing, beautiful, wonderful thing. Next time that the SCL staff send out a request for, hey, are you doing anything interesting? Brag like hell. Just say, yes, we're doing it. And I don't even care if it's boring. Just put it out there. It'll be filtered later. Share and shout. These are things that we need to do. It's not just, oh, that's self-promotion. We shouldn't do self-promotion. Oh, we're a government institution. We should. No, what you're doing is you're giving your community credit. This community is amazing. Look at what their library is doing. Give them credit. But take the time to make the active message. Focus on the benefits. Why are we doing? I love the Fun Palace. I'm going to keep picking on the Fun Palace. Because people were excited about it. And it is an exciting concept. But it also is because it has benefits, right? When she was telling the story of Fun Palace, it wasn't, hey, it's October, let's just do something. It was, and this is how it meets our arts engagement, and this is how it works with different minorities, and this represents different community population. This is the service area, right? We tell a story and the benefits, and we must beware the dangers of nostalgia. John Palfrey, who's a former law librarian at Harvard, now the headmaster of a wonderful preparatory school in Massachusetts, wrote a great book, Bibliotech, go buy it, and he talks about the dangers of nostalgia. What do we do when people have a 20-year-old vision of libraries, a 30-year-old vision, a 50-year-old vision of libraries? It's really tempting for us. It is really tempting for me, for you, to get out the, don't you want to go and smell the books? Don't you want to sit in the leather chairs? Don't you, right? It's really easy because we think that's what people want to hear. But it's much more exciting to go, don't you want to get a job? Don't you want to rule the world? Don't you want to change the universe? Don't you want to be part of these things? That's an exciting message. And so we have to be very careful, because if we constantly coming up, this words matter, with what I call the books plus approach, yes, we've got books, they're great, and we've got all this other stuff. This is a fellow, George Lakoff, who wrote a book called Don't Think of an Elephant. He's a cognitive linguist. And what he does is he says, as humans, what we do is we associate things in our brain. So for example, don't think of the color red. How many people just thought of the color red? He says you can't help it. That's how our brains are. So, don't think of an elephant, because people think of an elephant. That's just how it goes. And we found through all these things, source amnesia and basic psychology, if you repeat a concept or a term over and over again, what happens is people hold on to the term. So when Richard Nixon got on television and said, I am not a crook, after a whole year of having people say, he's a crook, people heard, day one, he's not a crook. Day two, a crook. Day three, crook. Right? You just lose that. So if we keep saying books and books and books and, the and will disappear and the books will remain. Not against books, not anti-book, love books. But we can be so much more, because those are tools to help us do things. So ultimately, and I'm going to skip this part. No, I'm not. Stop calling them customers. They're citizens. They pay taxes. It's not like they have a choice, right? I have a real problem with democratically elected governments treating their citizens as customers. Because, if I hate how my Department of Motor Vehicles hands out driver's licenses, I don't get to pick another one with better customer service. I can't say, oh, I'm going to try Wyoming today. I'm stuck with them. And not only am I stuck with them, I put them there. It's my government. I elected them. I pay taxes. I was in charge of oversight. I can complain. We have an ownership responsibility. They're citizens. They're members. They're neighbors. They're allies that are coming in on a regular basis. Do we want to treat them well? Yes. Is the only phrase we can come up with our minds about treating people well customer service? How about humanely? How about neighborly? All right, that's very US. How about, brilliantly? Whatever it is. And we got to be careful of him. All right. The main word that we have to worry about, though, the main message that I want you to take away, is that what ultimately draws together the raves in the library, what ultimately drives the palaces, and what drives together these different services is ultimately learning. That as librarians, we have a mission to improve society. How do we do it? Through facilitating knowledge creation in our community. Big fancy terms. Put it this way. We help our communities make smarter decisions. They make smarter decisions about development. They make smarter decisions about employment. They make smarter decisions about education, about health. We want our communities to be smarter. In the United States, we desperately want our communities to be smarter. There are certain populations in the latest elections that we want to be much, much smarter. We want them to make better decisions. We want our councils not to love us. We want our councils to use us. We want our councils not to see us as a necessary service. We want us to see us as an essential source for making decisions. Right? How many services do we provide to them on a regular basis that say things like, this is what's going on in your community. This is the latest issues coming. Here's the issue brief. What's happening with it? That's the services we want to be able to provide. We help our communities make better decisions. We want them to be smarter. And we must understand that there are tools to make people smarter, and there's the process of making people smarter. For a long time, we were focused on the tools, but it's like defining a surgeon by a scalpel. Oh, you have a scalpel. You must be a surgeon. Really not the person I want to see in a dark alley. Right? You want your doctor to be a good doctor. The tools they use, you want to change. I went through cancer. Lovely. Yay. The cancer I had 30, 40 years ago would have been treated with radical surgery and radiation. Radiation to the point that most people that would go through my treatment would end up with another form of cancer. Today, they treat it with chemicals. They treat it with chemotherapy. Not a pleasant thing to go through. But they talk about cures, and they talk about keeping it. I don't want to define you just because, oh, you use radiation, you're an oncologist. I want you to be an oncologist because you're curing, solving the problem. The tools are going to change. We were having a discussion last night at dinner about reading. I don't care if you read from a book. I don't care if it's a big book or a fluffy book, a red book or green book. I don't care if it's on a screen. I don't care if it's with a fox. I don't care if it's in a box. Right? We want people to read because by reading, they get more access, more narratives, more knowledge. They learn things. We want them to learn. We want them to learn with mathematics and their hands and performing with their neighbors. We want them to learn. What do all those things at the beginning have in common? They're all opportunities for our communities to learn, and by learning to make better decisions. Because we know that learning is participatory. We know that learning is inquiry-driven. That means people have their own. This is why we're not a school. We're not a school because we don't say, these are the 5 things you must know. What we say is, what do you want to know? And by the way, while you're learning about snakes, while you're learning about Iran, while you're learning about what have you, we're going to teach you a process called information literacy. And we're going to talk about sources, and we're going to talk about different knowledge. And we're going to teach you to be smarter. And we learn from fiction and nonfiction. That story that I told about Ferguson and the fact that it was this caricature. How many nations do we have that caricature? The great authors that have come out of Africa, and they say, when you think of Africa, you think of disease and you think of poverty. And part of that is because you've never read a story about a 13-year-old girl growing up in Uganda. You've never read a story about what it is to be a private detective in this country. You've never read a story about the day-to-day life. You have a collapsed narrative. And by fiction, I can show you the richness of different cultures and the art and different experiences, and it makes us more akin, more human. And it's lifelong and continuous. The other thing we have to worry about is if we constantly promote and market libraries, we are in a great risk. What is the risk? Imagine if we marketed hospitals the way some of us market libraries. It is a building, and it's big and interesting. It's full of the latest equipment that costs lots of money. Come and meet other sick people and get medicine. And my personal favorite, remember as a child when you had your tonsils out and you could eat all the ice cream you want? Yeah, we still have ice cream. Right? What's missing from this message, this narrative, this market is people and purpose. Right? When you talk about hospitals, you talk about doctors and nurses and getting well and healing. And we come back to this. Our mission is to help people learn. And yes, that happens in buildings, but it happens out on soccer fields, and it happens on, football fields, and it happens on, the cricket pitch. It happens with Wi-Fi, and it happens out in shopping areas. And librarians need to get out of their building, drag the communities in, and you guys get the hell out of the way and go to where people can't get in or don't know you're there. Because that's the thing. When I bring up this mission, I've got a lot of people who look at this mission, they go, Dave, that's a great mission for a librarian, but it's also my mission, and I am a author, teacher, publisher. Right? The mission of a teacher is to improve society through creating community. The mission of a publisher is to that's not a bad thing. Those are called our natural allies and partners, where we can come together and librarians can build this platform we call a library. Stop defining a librarian by where they work in the building they're in. Do it the other way around. Librarians create libraries. We manage them, we maintain them, we sustain them. Right? And I won't go into, because I know that's a 12-hour-long course and I'm about to go over time, about what makes up a librarian. There are 3 ways, we'll get into those later. But the point is, we're building this thing. And this thing is to enable a network, that living knowledge network, where we are working with entrepreneurs and teachers and volunteers and curators and technologists and housewives and children. And we're working and communicating on a regular basis. But what's even more amazing about this network is we allow a network to connect the entrepreneur to the curator, and we connect our network together. Right? We talk about collection development, and we only apply it to our books. The true collection of any library is the community that it serves. The community members you have living there, lawyers, doctors, professors, housewives, engineers, plumbers, they are a much richer source of knowledge than any book you put on a shelf. If someone comes into your library and they hands a book, goes, I think this is a good book, you should put in your collection. You don't wince, you have a process, it goes to committee, you like it, you wrap it in plastic, you put it on a shelf. But what happens if a Nobel laureate comes up and says, I have something to share with our community, what can you do with me? We go, let me find the director and hope for the best. What's that process to bring them in and curate them? But the last thing I'm going to say, last thing I want to say, is that when we do this, what fundamentally holds together all of those services, from fun palaces to raves to maker spaces to bookmobiles to collections to quiet reading time to yoga to whatever, is a set of core values and principles. These are mine. I know that there are some that are out as part of the task force, and SILIP has some, but we believe in learning. We believe that the fundamental things we do are about learning. And what are we going to support? Anything that allows you to learn. We believe in openness and transparency, that to understand what's going on, you need to have access. We believe in intellectual freedom and safety, that a library is a safe place to explore dangerous ideas. We believe that we are not unbiased or neutral or objective. I'm sorry, I hate to take on a fighter pilot because he could take me down in a second. But you are not objective, nor will you ever be objective. You have a point of view. If you think that libraries should be funded at all, you have a point of view. If you believe that libraries are a good thing, you have a point of view. If you believe that people should have open and wide access to all different kinds of information, you have a point of view. It's a great one. I agree with it. I love it. But don't pretend for a second it is neutral or unbiased. It is that bias, that unobjectivity, that mission, that passion that you have that's what makes you a library. And when we intersect and when we talk with these people, that's what we should be sharing. It shouldn't be, here's the space, do what you want. It should be, come into the space, do what you want. And by the way, while you're here, let's talk about the importance of openness and learning and intellectual safety and freedom. We want our values to not get stuck in our building. What we want all our learning experiences to create a community that fundamentally believes in these values as well. So when I tweeted out the story about Ferguson, I got a tweet back, Ferguson, library always makes a difference. And I said, no. I said, that's not true. I said, first of all, a library can only exert gravity and shield you from the rain. A librarian makes a difference. And, by the way, they don't automatically make a difference. Just because you have a library doesn't mean your community is better. A librarian chooses to make the difference. Melanie Townsend Diggs chose to open that place. Scott Bonner chose to open that. You are choosing to work in an environment that is tense, that is underfunded, undermanned. You are choosing that. And it's a noble choice. And it's not one you should settle for by any means. You should fight and rail against it. But by staying, by being part of that, you are choosing to try and fix the situation and make it better. I commend you on that. And I believe that you're doing it because you believe that communities are better with good librarians providing good educational opportunities. I've gone too long. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.